We got to the cabin just before sunset. 4 of us packed into an old SUV with snacks, firewood, and a couple coolers full of beer and food. The cabin belonged to a friend named Travis, or maybe it was his cousin, I don't remember exactly. I just know it wasn't a rental through a legit site. It was something someone hooked us up with last minute when our original booking near Asheville fell through. The guy handed over the keys in a grocery store parking lot and said, "Everything's ready. Enjoy yourselves." The place was deep in the woods, about 40 minutes outside Asheville, past the paved roads and cell signal. The driveway was just a long stretch of gravel and potholes leading through trees, until finally it opened into a small clearing with the cabin at the center. It looked decent. 2 floors, wooden deck, fire pit out back. The windows were darkened from the outside, but the inside was clean and stocked with basics. It felt more like someone actually lived there part-time, not just a rental. A few personal things were still lying around. Books, mugs, some clothes in one of the closets. That struck me as odd, but we shrugged it off. The first night, after unloading everything and setting up outside, we lit the fire pit and started grilling. There wasn't much to do in terms of entertainment, no TV, no service, but that was kind of the point. We played music off a downloaded playlist, had a few drinks, and just relaxed under the trees. It was getting dark when someone looked up and asked, "What's that?" Hovering maybe 30 or 40 feet above the clearing, just past the treetops, was a small drone. The kind with 4 rotors and blinking red lights. It didn't make any loud buzzing noise like some of the bigger ones do, just a soft hum if you really paid attention. It wasn't moving around or anything, just staying in place. We figured maybe someone nearby was just flying it for fun. A neighbor, maybe, or some curious local. After about 5 minutes, it drifted sideways, disappeared above the trees, and we didn't see it again that night. The next day was pretty uneventful. We hiked around a bit, played cards, drank more, did the usual cabin stuff. But that evening, when we went back outside to cook dinner, the drone showed up again, same height, same position, just hovering. Again, no sound, no movement. It just sat there, maybe watching us. There weren't any cameras we could see, but most drones now have built-in ones. It stuck around for almost exactly 5 minutes, then quietly backed away over the trees and vanished. By the 3rd night, it wasn't funny anymore. We started paying more attention to it. One of my friends tried to take a photo, but it was too dark and blurry. We turned off the music and tried to listen for where it came from, but we couldn't hear anything useful. It always came from the same direction, southwest, toward the thicker part of the woods, but the trees made it hard to see or track anything. It showed up at almost the exact same time every night, hovered in the same position, then left. That kind of consistency didn't feel casual. We were all a bit paranoid by then. Someone suggested maybe it was some sort of wildlife drone, like the Forest Service keeping tabs on the area. But the land wasn't marked for conservation or anything. No towers, no signs, no ranger stations. Besides, why show up every night, right over our cabin? And never during the day? On the 4th night, we decided we'd had enough. We made a plan. One of my buddies had brought a dirt bike for fun. He was kind of an adrenaline junkie, and he said if we could get a spotlight on the drone, he'd try to follow it. It sounded a little reckless, but none of us really thought anything bad would happen. We were more curious than scared. That evening, we set up outside earlier than usual. We turned off all the lights around the cabin and waited in near total darkness. We had a large handheld spotlight we'd brought for night hikes, and as soon as we saw the drone blink into view above the trees, we hit it with the beam. The drone didn't just drift away this time. It zipped off fast, lower than before, heading southwest through the woods. My friend was already on the bike with his helmet on. He fired it up and tore off down a side trail that looped toward the direction the drone had taken. We waited, listening to the engine fade into the trees. A few minutes passed. Then we heard it cut off in the distance. We stood there for a long time, straining to hear anything else. Eventually, the bike came back. He looked spooked. He said he followed the drone as far as he could, keeping his light aimed ahead of him. It led him through a few tight bends in the woods until he came out onto a flatter stretch of dirt road, not marked on any map we had. About 50 yards ahead was a pickup truck, dark gray or black, just sitting there, lights off, engine running. The drone had disappeared by then, maybe into the truck bed, he wasn't sure. But when he revved the engine of the bike and started slowly approaching the truck, it suddenly gunned it in reverse, turned around, and tore off into the dark. We called the local police the next morning when we got into town for supplies. We had no proof, no license plate, no video, but we told them everything. They took it half seriously, half like we were just drunk kids being paranoid. Still, one of them agreed to come check out the cabin later that day. When they arrived, they walked the property, looked around the back porch, and after about 10 minutes, one of them called us over. Hidden under the lip of the wooden awning, tucked just above eye level, was a tiny black pinhole camera, wired into the corner, facing directly at the back porch and the sliding door. The battery pack was tucked into the insulation above it. They took the camera, logged it as evidence, and told us this kind of thing actually happens more often than people think. Sometimes burglars scout remote properties with drones to see who's staying there. When they leave, what kind of gear they've got. Sometimes it's voyeurs, sometimes worse. They said there had been reports of burglaries in rental cabins around the area over the past few months, mostly places that weren't rented through official channels. There wasn't much more they could do. The truck was gone, the drone was gone, and unless fingerprints came back from the camera, there wasn't anything tying it to anyone. We packed up and left that afternoon. None of us wanted to stay another night. It just felt wrong after that. Weeks went by. We followed up, but the police said they hadn't found anything. No prints, no leads, no suspects. Just a hidden camera and a creepy drone that had probably been watching us from day one. I don't know who it was. Maybe someone local. Maybe someone who knew the cabin was often rented out unofficially and took advantage of that. Maybe even someone connected to the owner, though we never proved it. All I know is someone was watching us every night and they had a plan. What the plan was, I don't want to guess. I haven't stayed in a friend of a friend cabin since. Now I stick to places with real listings, real reviews, and real accountability. Because that trip showed me how easy it is to end up being watched without even knowing it, and how little anyone can do about it once it's already started. My cousin Jake and I had been planning the trip for months. He'd found this old hunting cabin in Central Oregon that his friend's family used to own, way out in the middle of nowhere. They weren't using it anymore and said we could crash there for a few days if we wanted. We both needed the break. Life had been dragging, and we figured a few quiet days in the woods would do us some good. No phones, no internet, just trees, cold air, and silence. The drive out there was long and mostly through back roads. After we passed through the last tiny town, we didn't see another person for over an hour. It was just pine trees on both sides and the occasional deer darting across the road. The road itself turned into gravel, then dirt. We had to go slow to avoid tearing up Jake's truck. It was already late afternoon by the time we got to the cabin. The place looked exactly like I expected it to. Old, worn, and small. Just a single-story wooden shack with a metal roof, a crooked porch, and a few steps that creaked under our boots. There was no power, no running water, and no cell signal. Inside, it smelled like dust and old wood. There was a wood stove, a propane heater, a small kitchen with a hand pump sink that didn't work anymore, and 2 narrow cots along the far wall. A few mouse droppings on the counter. We cleaned those up. There were 2 lanterns, 1 propane, 1 battery-powered, and a couple of candles already there. We'd brought extra fuel, water, and enough food to last 4 days. I unpacked my sleeping bag, set up one of the cots, and Jake did the same. We cooked some kin stew that first night, ate quietly, and talked a bit before bed. The woods were completely still. No wind, no animals, nothing. Just silence pressing in from all sides. The first night went by without anything weird. I slept lighter than usual, hard not to in a place like that, but nothing happened. In the morning, I woke up early, made coffee over the little propane burner, and sat out on the porch while the fog lifted. The forest out there felt ancient, dark green, thick, and heavy. The kind of place that doesn't care if you're there or not. We spent most of that day hiking around, looking for old animal tracks and trying to find a creek we saw on the map. The air was cool but dry. No other cabins nearby, No signs of anyone else. Just us and miles of trees. We didn't even hear any hunters or see old campsites. That night, we cooked hot dogs on sticks over a fire pit and talked until the stars came out. The sky was so clear it looked fake. Then we doused the fire, went inside, locked the door, and went to bed. It must have been sometime after midnight when I woke up. I didn't hear anything, but I smelled it. It hit me before I even opened my eyes. Gasoline. Strong and sharp. My first thought was the heater, but we hadn't used it that night. I sat up fast, heart already thumping, and turned on the lantern. Jake was already awake, sitting up on his cot, looking at me like he smelled it too. The air inside the cabin reeked. Not overpowering, but strong enough that it was coming through the walls or maybe the floorboards. We checked the heater and the propane canisters. Nothing. No leaks, no hissing sound, nothing out of place. That's when we went outside. The air out there was colder than I expected. I remember that clearly, how the cold hit my face and arms, but the gas smell hit me harder. It was worse outside. We stepped around the corner of the cabin, and that's when we saw it. An empty red plastic gas can was tipped over in the dirt, maybe 3 feet from the wall. There was a dark, shiny trail leading from it, freshly poured fuel. As we followed it with our eyes, we saw it wasn't just spilled. Someone had walked around the entire cabin, pouring gasoline in a wide loop. It went all the way around like someone meant to trap us in there. Whoever did it was thinking about lighting it. There were boot prints in the soft dirt next to the trail. Fresh, still sharp and defined. I crouched down and ran my finger along one of the prints. The edges crumbled just a little, still wet underneath. The prints led away into the trees, toward the slope behind the cabin. We didn't follow them. I don't know if it was fear or just some instinct, but both of us knew we weren't going to find anything we wanted out there. We didn't say anything. We just went back inside and shut the door quietly, locked it, and shoved the table in front of it. I got the axe from the corner, and Jake grabbed his hunting rifle. We sat on our cots with our backs to the wall, lantern low, eyes on the windows. Every little crackle in the trees outside made my stomach tighten. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. I don't know how long we sat like that. Hours, maybe, just watching and waiting. I kept replaying the whole thing in my head. Why didn't they light it? Were they just trying to scare us? Were they still out there watching us? The idea that someone had crept up to our cabin in the middle of nowhere and poured fuel around it like they were preparing to trap or kill us, it was almost too insane to process. But the proof was outside. We stayed like that until the sky started to lighten through the windows. As soon as it was bright enough to see more than a few feet ahead, we grabbed our bags, shoved everything we could into them, and got out. We didn't even eat. We didn't care about the mess or the trash or anything else. The trail out was rough in the morning light, but we made it back to the gravel road and kept going until we found a gas station with a payphone. The first thing we did was call the sheriff's office in that county. I explained what we saw. I tried to keep my voice calm, but it came out a little shaky. The deputy I spoke to didn't sound shocked. He listened carefully, then told me it sounded like someone was trying to scare us off the land. He said we weren't the first ones to complain about weird stuff out there. Sometimes hunters would come back early after hearing things or finding stuff moved around their camps. He didn't have names, no arrests, nothing concrete. But he told us if we went back out there, we needed to be armed, alert, and not alone. We didn't go back. Jake never mentioned that trip again. I didn't either. That night sits in the back of my mind like a shadow. I still don't know who did it or what they wanted. But someone came out to that cabin in the dead of night, circled it with gasoline, and walked off into the trees without a trace. And for whatever reason, they changed their mind about lighting the match. But it wasn't a joke. It wasn't a prank. It was a message, and we got it loud and clear. My boyfriend and I rented a cabin in Big Bear for a quiet winter getaway. It was early December, and we both needed a break. Life had been stressful. Work, family stuff, just everything. And the idea of a secluded cabin in the woods, with no neighbors in sight, sounded like exactly what we needed. We found the place through a smaller listing site. It wasn't Airbnb or anything big, but it looked nice in the photos. It was a 2-story wooden cabin with a big porch, a stone fireplace, and surrounded by tall pines. The couple who owned it, probably in their late 60s, met us when we arrived to hand off the keys. They were friendly enough, kind of old school, and they gave us a quick walkthrough of the place. It had 3 bedrooms, 1 upstairs and 2 downstairs. As they showed us around, the wife casually mentioned that the back downstairs room was locked and used for storage. She said it wasn't anything to worry about, just old furniture and boxes. We didn't press them on it. It was their place and we had more than enough room. The first night was quiet. We made dinner, lit a fire, and played cards for a while. The cabin had that musty but cozy smell that old wooden places always have. There were a few creaks from the floors and some wind noise through the windows, but nothing unusual. It was cold outside, but the propane heater and the fireplace kept us warm. We slept in the upstairs bedroom, which had a small balcony facing the woods. The second night is when things started to feel off. We were in bed watching a movie on my laptop when I heard a sound. It was faint, like a soft bump or something falling, but it came from downstairs. I paused the movie and listened. My boyfriend didn't hear it at first, but then there was another sound. A light creak, then silence. It wasn't the wind. I know what wind sounds like. This was inside. We both got up and went downstairs. I turned on every light as we moved through the hallway. Everything looked normal. The kitchen, the living room, the laundry room, all fine. But when we passed the locked back bedroom, I noticed something. The air near the door felt colder, like a draft was coming from underneath it. And we heard a noise again, just once, like a shuffle or a slow drag across the floor. We both stood there, completely still, waiting to hear it again. But nothing happened. I walked up to the door and knocked. Not hard, just a couple gentle taps. No response. We waited. Still nothing. I pressed my ear against it, but couldn't hear anything more. Eventually, we went back upstairs. We tried to shake it off, saying it was probably just the house settling or something stored in their shifting. But neither of us really believed that. The third night was worse. A lot worse. We were both on edge before we even went to bed. We left the lights on downstairs this time and locked the front and back doors, then double-checked all the windows. Around 1:30 in the morning, I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first. Everything was quiet, but then I heard it clear this time, from downstairs, a muffled thud, then what sounded like slow footsteps, but uneven, like someone trying not to make noise. Then silence again. I got up and looked over the railing toward the lower level. It was dim, the hallway light casting shadows through the banister. I didn't see anything moving, but the air felt thick, like something was wrong. I woke my boyfriend and we both sat there listening. Then came another sound, dragging, like fabric or something soft being pulled across the floor. And then a cough, a low, muffled cough from behind that locked door. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. My boyfriend went to grab the small camping knife he kept in his backpack. We didn't go downstairs this time. We stayed at the top of the stairs, listening. The sounds didn't come back after that cough, but neither of us slept the rest of the night. We just sat there, waiting for anything else. At sunrise, we finally moved. We packed quickly, didn't even make breakfast. Just tossed everything into the car and locked up. On our way out, we called the owners. I told them what had happened, about the noises, about someone coughing in the locked room. The man on the phone was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That room's just storage. The cabin was empty before you got there." I told him I wanted him to come check it out, maybe call the police or something. He got defensive, said he didn't appreciate being accused of anything and that if we were uncomfortable, we could leave. But they weren't coming up. He hung up before I could say anything else. We left. On the drive home, neither of us talked much. We kept replaying everything in our heads, trying to make sense of it. Could it have been an animal? Some kind of weird sound carrying through the wood walls? But no animal coughs like that. And no animal moves like that, soft, careful, like it didn't want to be heard. About a week later, I was reading through a local news site, looking for any mention of weird things happening in that area. That's when I found the article. A man had been arrested in a nearby town, less than 10 miles from the cabin. He'd been caught breaking into someone's garage. The article said he'd been hiding out in people's basements, sheds, even attics, mostly short-term rentals. He'd wait for guests to arrive and then sneak in through crawl spaces or unlocked windows, sometimes living in hidden areas between guests. They found food wrappers, stolen clothes, even makeshift bedding in several places. Police believed he'd been doing it for months. The article had a photo of him being led away in handcuffs. He looked older than I expected, maybe mid-40s, unshaven, wearing a worn-out jacket. He didn't look dangerous at first glance, just tired and quiet. But it made my stomach turn to think someone like that might have been hiding just feet away from where we slept. I stared at the screen for a long time. Everything made sense now. The sounds, the cough, the cold draft from under the door. He must have gotten in there somehow, maybe months before, and the owners never noticed. Or maybe they did. Maybe they knew someone had been squatting and didn't want trouble or attention. I don't know. But what I do know is this: if we had opened that door, if we had tried to force it open, I don't know what would have happened. Maybe he would have run. Maybe he would have attacked. Maybe worse. We were lucky. That's the only word I can use. We were just lucky. I'll never stay in a cabin like that again. Doesn't matter how peaceful the area looks or how friendly the owners seem. If a room is locked and they tell you not to worry about it, worry about it. Because I still think about that door sometimes. About what was behind it, listening to us every night. Maybe watching through the crack underneath. Breathing our same air. Just waiting. I booked a cabin in the Adirondacks through a small private website I found while browsing around for off-grid getaways. I wanted something remote, quiet, surrounded by woods. I didn't want to deal with Airbnb or hotels or anyone else. Just a solid weekend alone to reset my head. The listing said the cabin was recently renovated, had modern fixtures, running water, power from solar panels, and good cell reception. The pictures looked great, clean inside, natural with tones, big windows, and about 50 feet from a small lake. I booked it for Friday through Monday. The owner sent me the directions, the door code, and told me to enjoy the peace. I got there late Friday afternoon. The road in was a narrow gravel path through thick forest. My truck handled it fine, but I kept it slow because of the potholes and dips. The place really was secluded. No other cabins in sight, no neighboring houses, nothing. Just trees, hills, and that still lake. When I pulled up, the sun was dropping behind the ridge, lighting the treetops in orange. The cabin sat on a small clearing with a fire pit, 2 Adirondack chairs out front, and a tiny wooden dock that led out into the water. Everything looked exactly like the pictures. Inside, it was cozy but modern. Small kitchen with new appliances, a queen bed with clean sheets, a little couch facing a propane fireplace, and a clean bathroom. No TV, no internet, but my phone had a signal, just like the ad said. I unpacked my bag, threw some stuff in the fridge, and sat outside for a bit as it got dark. The silence out there was real. No distant cars, no dogs barking, no hum of anything. Just the wind in the trees and frogs down by the water. That first night, I slept hard. I didn't even wake up once. No noises, no strange feelings. Just deep sleep, which I hadn't had in weeks. The next morning, I made eggs and coffee and sat on the dock for a while. I read a little, took a short walk around the nearby woods, and built a small fire as the evening came in. The night was cold but peaceful. I had a hoodie and a good blanket, so I was fine. The second night started off just as quiet. I went to bed around 10 after reading for a bit. I kept my phone charging next to me. No lights on except the solar string lights outside, which turned off around 11. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. I just opened my eyes and had this weird feeling like something wasn't right. It wasn't a noise that woke me exactly. It was more like a shift in the silence. You spend enough time in a place that quiet and you start noticing every tiny thing. I laid there for a bit, just listening. First, it was still. Then I heard gravel crunching, like slow footsteps. It came from the direction of the driveway, maybe 15 feet from the window near the bed. The cabin didn't have curtains, just simple wooden blinds that were half open. I stayed still and listened. Then I heard voices. Two men, not yelling but clearly arguing. The first voice was lower, kind of mumbled. I couldn't make out all the words, but he said something like, "You sure it's not empty?" The second guy answered, louder than the first, "The lights were off. Let's just go in." I stayed absolutely still. My heart was thudding in my chest so loud I was scared they might hear it. I slid slowly out of bed, crouched low, and crawled to the window. I carefully lifted one blind just enough to peek through. There were two men standing near my truck. One had a flashlight in his hand, but it was off. They were both dressed like they'd been hiking or camping, jackets, boots, backpacks. One of them pointed toward the cabin. I could barely see their faces, but they didn't look like anyone I knew or had seen before. I didn't want to speak, but I had to do something. My phone was right there in my hand. I unlocked it, opened the dialer, and whispered just loud enough to carry through the cracked window. I already called the cops. They both froze. The guy with the flashlight raised it but didn't turn it on. The other one swore under his breath, turned to him and hissed something I couldn't hear, and then they bolted, just like that. Straight into the woods, fast and quiet. Not down the road, not toward another cabin, just into the trees behind the cabin, out of sight. I stayed crouched there, heart pounding. I didn't actually call anyone, but I kept my phone ready. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every few minutes I'd get up and check the windows, but there was no sign of them coming back. I didn't hear anything else. No footsteps, no talking, just the wind and leaves and whatever animals moved through the woods at night. As soon as the sky started getting light, I packed up. I didn't even eat breakfast. I threw everything back into my bag, locked the cabin, and drove out as soon as I could see the road clearly. That whole ride down the gravel path, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Once I got back into cell range, I called the owner. No answer. I left a voicemail explaining what had happened and asked if they knew anything about it. I didn't hear back that day or the next. I emailed too, but nothing. Finally, 2 days later, I got a short email from the owner saying they had double-booked the weekend by accident. The two guys were apparently friends of the owner's cousin or something. They thought the cabin was free, saw my truck, assumed someone broke in, and were deciding whether to confront me or not. That's what the owner said, at least. I was pissed, but more than anything I was unsettled. If I hadn't said anything, what would they have done? Just walked in while I was asleep? Try to kick me out? They didn't knock. They didn't try calling the owner. They just crept around outside in the middle of the night, whispering and deciding whether to enter a dark cabin. I didn't reply to the email. I just let it go. I haven't booked anything through a private site since. No matter how nice the pictures are or how remote the place is, I need to know there's accountability. Reviews, a way to report problems, a number I can actually call. That one weekend killed any interest I had in those off-grid listings. I still think about how quiet it got after they ran, how dark the woods were, how there was no way to know where they went or if they stayed close. That's the part that stuck with me, not knowing how long they were out there before I woke up, how close they were to just walking in. I haven't gone back to the Adirondacks since. I took a solo trip to a mountainside cabin in British Columbia early last winter. The place belonged to an old friend's grandfather. Hand-built, off-grid, no neighbors for miles, completely surrounded by untouched forest. He used it as a trapper's cabin decades ago, and it hadn't been lived in regularly for years. When I mentioned I was feeling burned out and just wanted to be off the grid for a while, my friend offered it up without hesitation. Said I'd be alone but safe. Getting there was no small task. I had to drive 5 hours from the nearest town, then hike about 40 minutes from where the logging road ended. I had to bring everything with me: food, propane, firewood, water filters, and a solar charger for my phone in case of emergencies. No cell service, no internet, no running water, and no electricity. Just a wood stove, some old furniture, a cot, and a view that made you feel like you were the last person on Earth. The first couple of days were exactly what I needed. Cold, quiet, simple. I'd wake up with the sunrise, cook breakfast on a small propane stove, chop some wood, and then read or hike for a few hours. At night, I'd light a few lanterns, maybe write in a notebook, and then go to bed early. It was the kind of stillness you don't realize your body needs until you're in it. The snow had just started settling in for the season, no more than a few inches deep, but enough to muffle sound and track movement. On the third day, I was outside chopping wood just before dusk. I remember I had taken off my coat because I'd worked up a sweat. I paused to catch my breath, wiping my face with my sleeve, and that's when I noticed something across the valley. There was a figure standing there, far off, maybe 200 or 300 meters across the ridge. They were wearing a neon orange or yellow vest. It immediately caught my attention because nothing that color exists naturally out there, and because I hadn't seen a single soul since I'd arrived. They weren't moving, just standing still, facing in my direction. From that distance, I couldn't make out any features, but it was definitely a person. I waved casually at first, then a bit more exaggerated. They didn't react at all. I stared at them for maybe a minute before I looked away to grab my coat. When I looked back, they were gone. No movement, no sound, just not there anymore. I tried not to let it bother me. Maybe it was a hiker or a surveyor. Still, something about the way they just stood there watching, if that's even what they were doing, sat wrong with me. I didn't see any signs of snowmobiles, no tracks, nothing. Just them, then gone. That night, the temperature dropped. I had the fire going strong, had eaten a big meal, and was just about to doze off when I heard it. Crunching snow outside. Slow steps, not animal-like. Rhythmic, deliberate. It sounded like someone walking a wide circle around the cabin. I sat up on the cot, completely still, listening. The footsteps would come and go, soft when they were further away, louder when they were closer. My breathing felt loud in my chest. I grabbed the flare gun I kept near the stove and held it in my lap. I didn't have a firearm, just the flare gun and a hatchet. But in that moment, even just having something in my hands made me feel a little less helpless. The circling went on for maybe 20 minutes. Always just outside the edge of visibility from the windows. Never any knocking, never any attempt to get in. Just those slow, deliberate steps. Then silence. I waited another hour, wide-eyed and tense, before I let myself rest. I didn't sleep well. Every gust of wind, every creak of the wood, made my heart jump. In the morning, I went outside with the flare gun in one hand and my boots barely laced. The snow confirmed it. There had been someone out there. Human boot prints, full size. They'd walked a full loop around the cabin, occasionally stepping closer, sometimes backing off. No prints coming or going, just the loop. Like they'd appeared out of the woods, walked around me while I slept, and vanished. That was enough to freak me out, but it wasn't the worst of it. As I stepped further out, I started noticing small flags in the snow, thin plastic ones, the kind surveyors use, bright red. I counted 7 at first, all freshly planted. Each one was placed precisely around the cabin in a rough perimeter, like someone was marking off the boundaries of the property. Each flag was stabbed straight into the snow, in ground that would have been frozen solid a day earlier. I walked the perimeter slowly, counting them. 15 total, some close to the cabin, some out near the treeline, all spaced with intention. It wasn't random. I called my friend as soon as I got back inside, using the sat phone I'd packed just in case. He sounded concerned but confused. Said there was no logging planned anywhere near that area. The land hadn't been touched in decades. No one was even supposed to be out there. It wasn't part of any public development or utility grid. Just raw land owned by his family. His grandfather had filed a bunch of paperwork years ago to keep it that way, permanently undeveloped, even protected to some degree. I didn't pack up immediately, but I knew I was done. I spent that last morning sealing everything back up, dumping out water, dousing the fire, and covering my tracks best I could. I didn't see anyone else that day, but I kept glancing out at the woods, waiting for that neon vest to reappear. The hike back to my truck was the longest 40 minutes of my life. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of branches in the wind, made me stop and look over my shoulder. I didn't feel like I was being chased. I felt like I was being watched, followed from a distance, just outside the edges of where I could see. I didn't stop until I hit pavement again. I didn't even take off my pack until I was halfway back to the highway. When I got home, I didn't talk about it much. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but it stayed with me. I still wonder what those flags were for. If someone was planning something illegal out there, or maybe trying to scare me off. It wasn't logging. There were no access roads, no heavy equipment, just one guy in a vest, standing perfectly still, and red flags left behind like a message. I haven't gone back since, and I don't plan to. My friend asked once if I'd ever want to do another trip out there. I said no, not because I was scared of the woods or the cold or being alone. It's because whoever was out there, they weren't scared of me. They wanted me to see them, and they wanted me gone. My girlfriend and I were staying at her uncle's cabin near Lake Tahoe while he was out of the country for work. It was early spring, still cold at night, but the snow had mostly melted. The cabin was in a quiet part of the woods, a few miles off the main road, with no neighbors in sight. The place was nice, simple but cozy. Wood-paneled walls, a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, one bedroom, and a bathroom with running water from a well. There was no cell service, and the Wi-Fi barely worked, which I honestly didn't mind. We'd come to unplug for a few days anyway. The first night was peaceful. We cooked pasta, drank some wine, and sat in front of the fire until we got tired. I fell asleep quickly, dead tired from the long drive up from the Bay Area. I didn't hear a thing that night. The second day, we just hung around, walked down to the lake, skipped some rocks, took photos. There was still a bite in the air, so we bundled up, but the sun felt good on our faces. We came back before dark and made dinner again, this time just grilled cheese and tomato soup. Around 10, we turned in. She was already dozing off while I brushed my teeth. As I walked to the bedroom, I happened to glance out the kitchen window. There was a shed out back, maybe 30 yards from the cabin, partially hidden by some pine trees. I hadn't thought about it until then. It was pitch black outside, but I could see a faint glow coming from the shed. A soft yellow light, not flickering like a lantern, but steady, almost like a battery-powered lamp or a small bulb. We hadn't been in the shed. We didn't even know if it was locked. It gave me a weird feeling right away. My first thought was maybe her uncle left something running, but then I remembered she'd told me he hadn't been here in weeks. She even mentioned he asked her to check the place just to make sure nothing had been damaged by wind or fallen branches. I stood there for a bit, staring out the window, trying to convince myself it wasn't anything. Maybe a solar light he'd left on, but it had rained earlier that week. Could it really still be shining? I didn't go out there that night. I didn't tell her about it either. I didn't want to freak her out over something that might be nothing, but I barely slept. I kept hearing noises outside, soft crunches, like footsteps in the underbrush, the kind you might hear if someone was moving slow, trying not to be noticed. I kept checking the window, but I couldn't see anything. No faces, no movement, just trees and dark. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, finally dozing off around 4 a.m. The next morning, I told her about the light. She seemed surprised but not alarmed. We both put on boots and jackets and headed out to check the shed after breakfast. There was no lock on the door, just a rusted latch you could hook shut from the outside, but it was unlatched when we got there. I opened the door slowly. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Stale beer and old food. Inside, it was cramped, maybe 6 by 6 feet, with dusty shelves on one wall and a bare wooden floor. There was a blue sleeping bag laid out in the corner, half-zipped, and an old pillow next to it. Empty snack wrappers, beef jerky, a half-crushed pack of crackers. Beer cans lined up along one wall. A plastic grocery bag hanging from a nail with more garbage in it. It was clear someone had been staying in there. Recently, there was also a small LED lantern on the floor, right by the sleeping bag. That explained the light. It was off now, but it still had battery power. There were some boot prints on the wooden floor too, damp from the night, slightly muddy. Not ours. We backed out and shut the door. She looked freaked out now, and I didn't blame her. It was creepy. Someone had been living just a few steps away from us, probably watching the cabin, maybe even watching us. We talked about leaving that day, but I didn't want to pack up just yet. I told her we'd stay one more night and I'd keep an eye on things. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It didn't feel right that someone was using her uncle's property like that. I wanted to be sure they didn't come back. That afternoon, I tied some string across the inside of the shed door, from the handle to a nail on the other side. I attached a bunch of empty soda cans to the string so that if anyone opened the door, the cans would rattle and clank loud enough to wake us. It was a simple setup, but better than nothing. I didn't tell her about the trap. I just said I'd stay up a bit later to keep watch. That night, we went to bed early. I left the window cracked so I could hear better. I kept a flashlight next to me, along with my phone and a small hunting knife I'd found in one of the kitchen drawers. I lay in bed for hours listening. Every creak in the cabin, every gust of wind outside made my heart race. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard it, the cans. They rattled hard and quick, like the door had been opened fast. Then I heard footsteps, rapid, moving through the dry leaves and pine needles. I jumped up, grabbed the flashlight, and ran out the back door in my socks. The cold hit me instantly, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I swept the beam of light toward the shed and caught a glimpse of someone. Tall, wearing a dark hoodie, maybe in his 30s, darting into the trees. I couldn't see his face, but I saw the back of his legs moving fast, disappearing into the woods. I didn't chase him. I wasn't armed, and it wasn't worth the risk. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding, breath clouding in the cold air. Then I went back inside, locked the door, and told her everything. We packed in the dark, not saying much, just moving fast. By 2:15, we were in the car and driving down the dirt road toward the highway. The trees felt like they were pressing in on both sides. Every branch that scraped the car made us flinch. We drove straight to a diner about an hour away and sat there until sunrise, just drinking coffee and trying to calm down. She called her uncle and told him what happened. He said we did the right thing leaving, and he'd call the local sheriff. A few days later, we got a call back. The police had checked the shed and a few others in the area. Apparently, a man had been living in seasonal cabins and outbuildings for years. Never violent, just homeless and drifting. They found blankets and trash in at least 3 other sheds nearby, all within a mile. He'd probably been watching us from the woods, waiting for the right time to sneak in and sleep. It was a strange feeling, not quite a criminal, not exactly a threat, but still unsettling. Knowing someone was that close, watching, sleeping just yards away. I still think about it sometimes, about what might have happened if I hadn't set that trap, or if I'd gone to the shed that first night, alone. We haven't been back since. Neither has her uncle, as far as I know. He told her he was thinking about selling the place. I don't blame him. Some things you just don't forget. I rented a cabin in Vermont during mud season because I needed to get away from everything. Work had been exhausting. My phone never stopped buzzing, and I was tired in a way that even sleep couldn't fix. I didn't want anything fancy. I just wanted quiet, solitude, a place where I could hear the wind in the trees and nothing else. The cabin was exactly what I was looking for. Small, wooden, tucked into a thick patch of forest off a narrow dirt road that turned mostly to slush once the snow melted. It was early April, and the ground was soft and brown everywhere, soaked from melting snowbanks. The whole region was in that odd in-between phase, too cold for spring, too wet for winter, and too quiet for tourists. Mud season, the locals called it. Inside, the cabin was basic. A single bedroom, a kitchen with old appliances, and a living area with a wood stove that I had to feed manually. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi, barely any cell reception unless I stood out on the porch and held my phone in the air. It had the kind of stillness I was craving. The walls were thin but solid, the floors creaked a bit, but it was clean. The bedroom had a small bed with flannel sheets, and I'd brought a stack of books with me to pass the time. Felt perfect, or at least it did at first. There was one odd thing. In the hallway near the bedroom was a pull-down ladder that led up to a small attic. The ladder was retracted into the ceiling when I got there, and there was a little latch you could turn to bring it down. The host had mentioned it quickly when she handed over the keys. "Ignore the attic," she said. "Just storage." She didn't say it weirdly, but something about how fast she moved on from it stuck with me. That first night, I sat near the stove with a book and listened to the wind pick up outside. The trees scraped against each other, and every so often a gust would rattle the windows just enough to make me glance over. By 10 p.m., the wind had settled, and everything went silent. I went to bed and fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the drive. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to a soft sound coming from above me. It was faint, like a dull thumping, spaced out 3 or 4 of them. Then nothing. My first thought was squirrels or maybe raccoons on the roof. I didn't think much of it. I shifted under the blanket and went back to sleep. The next morning, I walked into the hallway and something felt off. I looked up at the attic hatch and saw that the door wasn't quite flush with the ceiling anymore. It had maybe a half-inch gap on one side, just enough to catch a bit of shadow. I stood there and stared at it for a moment, then chalked it up to temperature or swelling wood. The place was old. I pushed the door up with the end of a broom until it sat flat again and didn't think much of it after that. The second night, the same sound woke me. This time it was louder. A dragging noise, not fast, like something heavy being shifted. Then a couple of thuds. I sat up in bed and listened. My heart was beating harder now. I didn't hear any movement in the hallway or outside, just those sounds above me. After a minute or two, it stopped completely. I stayed awake longer this time, listening to the silence stretch on. Eventually, I drifted off. The next day, I walked the perimeter of the cabin. I looked up at the roof, half expecting to see signs of some animal getting in, but saw nothing. No droppings, no damage. I went back inside and stared up at the attic door again. It was flush this time, like it had never been opened. That evening, I kept the fire burning longer. I turned every light on in the cabin, even though I didn't really need them. I sat with my book but didn't read a word. I was just listening. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift of the wind outside made me flinch. I locked the front door and checked it twice. Same with the back. I went to bed just after midnight, leaving a light on in the hallway. Couldn't sleep. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard the creaking sound again. This time different, slower. I knew that sound. It was the ladder. I didn't move. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, listening to each long creak as the ladder unfolded and touched the floor. It wasn't rushed. It was careful, quiet, but not silent. I could hear each step as weight was put on it, like someone was easing down it with effort. My body was completely frozen. My heart felt like it was going to punch its way through my chest. I didn't even blink. The creaking stopped, and I waited. I didn't hear anything else. No footsteps in the hallway, no doors opening, just silence. I must have stayed awake for another 2 hours, barely breathing, staring at the door to my bedroom. But nothing happened. By sunrise, I got out of bed and went straight into the kitchen. I stood there, staring at the room, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it all. But then I saw the floor. Mud. There were boot prints on the linoleum. Faint but real. 4 of them. They weren't mine. I had taken my boots off at the door and hadn't gone outside in nearly 2 days. These prints were larger than my feet. They were also angled weirdly, like the person had come into the kitchen and then turned back toward the hallway. Not toward the door, back toward the attic. I stood there for a while just staring, too afraid to even move. Every instinct in me said leave, get out. So I packed my things, fast. I didn't clean up. I didn't double-check anything. I grabbed everything I had and was out the door in 15 minutes, driving over muddy roads that nearly swallowed my tires. I didn't even message the host. I just left. I didn't want to explain it. I didn't want to think about it. I went back home and tried not to look at the photos I'd taken of the place when I arrived. 2 weeks later, the host messaged me. It was a short, clipped message. She said she was sorry for the delay but felt I should know what had happened. After I left, She went up to the cabin to clean and reset it. When she tried to pull down the attic ladder, it jammed. Something was caught. She got a neighbor to help her pry it open. When they finally got inside, they found signs that someone had been living up there. Wrappers, empty water bottles, a sleeping bag, a flashlight, even a kitchen knife. There was a small vent in the attic that faced the woods, hidden from the front of the cabin. The police thought he'd been sneaking down the ladder at night and moving through the cabin quietly while people slept. They didn't know how long he'd been there, but based on what they found, probably weeks. I never responded to her message. I didn't want to have a conversation about it. I didn't want to go over the details again. I didn't even want to think about how many nights I lay there, asleep with someone quietly moving just above me, or maybe already inside. I still wonder how long he watched me. If he came into the room and just stood there watching. I'll never know. But I've never stayed in a cabin alone again. I don't think I ever will.